So addiction is a very weird thing. So I was watching this movie today, The Rage, on Tubi, and this kid is addicted to heroin, and he's talking about in the 50s they did this experiment where they put heroin in the water and then had clean water, and the rats were going to the heroin water. And then he said in the 80s, this guy Bruce Alexander did an experiment, the same thing, but he made this huge area for these rats with tunnels and everything you can think of, and which is funny because I just saw an article with the headline saying that these rats went from a few to like 2,200, and I'm assuming it's the same thing. But what's funny is that this kid said they didn't go for the heroin water because they had so much more room to play. And I started thinking, like this makes sense. So basically, these people that make these systems, for the distribution of drugs, they their system is their baby. I mean, they go to college and everything, right? And that system is their baby. It's their child. It's what works for them. It's what gives them dopamine. It's what they're very pragmatic minds, and they're not willing to give up. It's that determination plus the heightened experience of doing something that's considered wrong, but you're making money off it. I mean, it's a major contradiction in the human mind. That alone is an addiction. So then, like I did meth twice. It didn't do anything for me. Never went back to it. Never did heroin. Never did anything with needles. And I'm thinking, when my kids get older, there's a good chance they're going to be on drugs because highly addictive personalities run in my family. And that part of makes me think, well, what's the point? What is the point of putting in my effort when I know they're probably just going to end up doing exactly what I don't want them to do because people are oppositional, especially women. They're suppressed, so that's their outlet is to be oppositional when nobody's looking to set up the chessboard in a way that works for them, where the other person thinks they're starting off the chess game the same way as always. They're not. That's the illusion. That's the illusion when you have more than one person that is self aware or educated from somebody that's self aware, which knowledge goes down the line over time. So then I was watching uh, I Am Legend yesterday, and in the end, where the main antagonist, the mutation, is trying to break in, and the others are rooting behind him. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And just this one creature, this alpha male, is the one trying to force his way in, which kind of goes against the whole hierarchy thing. But they were in a process of evolving, so that means that normal routines and hierarchy, they don't work the same way. But what I saw was that these mutations were the Native Americans, and that Will Smith was like he was the one of the settlers, and think of it in your imagination, not the movie. And he's trying to tell them, I have your cure. But the Indians, before technology, that's another thing the guy said in The Rage, is that their surroundings uh, Well, the functions of their culture and everything depend on their surroundings. So when you're all about war, the same with the Vikings, but they settled down for what, Christianity, right? Probably, I'm guessing, because the same way with drug dealers, you got land, air, and sea, but when land and air are no longer available or much harder to get through, they're going to go by sea, right? And what happens is that allows the opposing force to only focus on the sea and make it even harder. So I'm assuming that's how it worked with the Vikings, is that they were constantly going to village to village to village, pillaging, and eventually those resources would have been hidden better. They would have been less. And then you got these religious people saying, well, nothing materialistic matters other than your family. And so these people, they would have been, the Vikings would have said to themselves, this is getting harder and harder. Land and air has been taken from us, and sea is not going to last much longer. And I know that doesn't make sense because the Vikings weren't in the air, but it's an analogy. And so they think to themselves, there's got to be a reason for this. We're going to figure out their secret, maybe. Maybe that's what they told themselves, but they knew all along that they just wanted to change their ways, but they didn't know how. Same with the Native Americans. They warred and warred and warred. If you have 10 tribes in a local area, and let's say 3 of them are all about war, it's going to keep the continuous overstimulation. It's going to keep them in that simulation mindset where this is just how it is. And it's just like the philosopher, I can't remember who it was, but he said, when you're talking to men, you're not talking to, it's something in the lines, you're not talking to a creature of logic. Just like Kant said, Samuel L. Kant. He said, I think it's Samuel L. Maybe I'm thinking Jackson. Who knows? But, anyways, so he said, we educate them to keep them from our throats. So when we educate people, it kind of washes away the addiction of violence because our mind wants to learn. But when you grew up with violence, that's all you're ever going to know. So it's hard. That's why it's taken us so long to become a somewhat civilized creature. But that doesn't mean we all listen to logic. You can put something in somebody's imagination and completely twist the path they were taking. And it's like, I'm thinking, well, before technology, what was logic to these people that couldn't and didn't want to understand? If you take land, air, and sea, well, you only got underground, right? But how can you do that? Well, you got to figure it out, because people are about, if you have a problem, you got to solve it. There's got to be a way. So when people come together, they discuss ideas. Imagine all these books that lasted through all these centuries that they were trying to get rid of them. They were burning people on crosses just to get rid of them, and yet they still managed to survive. But how much of those didn't survive? A lot of people, they don't have an imagination, and then you got these people that have an imagination, notice that there was something different about them, and well, now they're creating their baby. They're creating a path that they carved themselves that becomes their baby. Now, the problem with people and logic is that once a person finds a way to make it work, we often have this thing where, people will move on quick. They want something new. They want something better. Just like when I was at work, not that long ago, and one of the guys that I worked with, he was constantly, high energy, always talking, moving, jumping around. You could tell when he was on meth, because then he's like standing there. in his head. And you can tell he's totally in his head. I mean, he is living some sort of story that nobody could possibly interpret just by looking into his eyes. But what happens when all other distractions are gone and you're left with that one? There's a lot of times I want to give up, and everybody wants to give up. There's a lot of times where we reach this what feels like a pinnacle, and we think we're never going to go any further. What's the point? Now we're going backwards, and we have it in our mind. Well, maybe it's just time to reset. Maybe this misery is taking us into a deep hole where we're going to find another path. Who knows? But then you hit rock bottom. Nobody wants to help. Why? Because you're being so negative, you're being so down. But if you keep a smile on your face and put on a suit, it changes everything. It's like, just for instance, I know a lot of people, even around me, that don't want to see me succeed. They want to see me alone succeed and leave my family behind. Why? Because that justifies in everybody else's mind the things that they have done, other people do too. So when you see a person that doesn't bow to what everybody else bowed to them they seem wrong. They seem like the ones that are separated from everybody else. That's why we love drama. It gives dopamine because that person feels like, well, my life isn't that bad. So where is the logic? I guess it's all in our imagination, isn't it?